They were never meant to die, and yet they did, one by one, violently, mysteriously, and with identical signs of something far darker than disease. 15 young men, dead within 6 weeks. But here's what no one tells you. Their fingernails turned black. Their prayers reversed themselves. Their final words warned of a book buried in a chapel no one was allowed to enter again. The church called it consumption. But the doctor who examined the bodies, he vanished after burning his notes. That wasn't incompetence. That was fear. Real, gut-level, bone-deep fear. And what he saw in their blood, it was enough to make him flee Pennsylvania forever. This is not folklore. It's not fiction. It happened in 1832, a real place, real graves, a seminary buried under silence and pine needles, and still sealed by the Presbyterian Church to this day. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. This story didn't want to be found, which means it's exactly the one we must follow. Whitmore Seminary was born from noble ambition, to train holy men for a wild, godless frontier. Instead, it became a gate, a passage, and once it opened, whatever came through didn't leave. The descent began with Thomas Millikan, a scholar, a thinker, dead in 21 hours. His Latin prayers turned blasphemous, his body seized like a man being puppeted from the inside. The blackness on his hands wasn't rot, it pulsed, and his last words, the book in the chapel. God forgive us all. That was the key. What if I told you that phrase was also written, identically, on a letter discovered 180 years later, buried inside a crumbling wall of the old seminary ruins? What if I told you the handwriting matched a survivor's, because there was a survivor, and what he left behind has never been shown to the public, until now? This story is not about a sickness, it's about control, institutional containment, the silencing of a phenomenon that touched the edge of something far older than Christianity and far more patient. This is forbidden history, and if you keep listening, you'll understand why the church chose to erase it, and why those who didn't obey never left that building alive. But it all begins in the chapel, where something ancient was awakened, by accident, or perhaps by design. The chapel was never meant to hold anything dangerous, at least not on the surface. Built from local limestone and crowned with a walnut pulpit, it was supposed to be a sanctuary, an echo chamber of scripture and sermons. But the stone beneath it was not ordinary. The foundation ran deeper than recorded, and somewhere beneath the altar there was a sealed chamber, untouched since 1791. That year the land had belonged to a private religious order, one that vanished after a series of ritual fires. The seminary's founders never asked what came before them, or maybe they knew and chose to forget. But the students could feel it, not at first, but slowly, like a fog crawling in under the door, something began to shift. They began hearing things during morning devotions, not voices but a sound beneath the hymnals, a low rhythmic vibration, like breath behind the walls. They thought it was in their heads, until the first death. Thomas Millikan had spoken backwards Latin, but it wasn't just any Latin. Dr. Ashford recognized the phrasing. It came from Apocrypha Obscura, a banned medieval manuscript that had once been kept in the Vatican's most restricted vaults, sealed due to its connection with possession, mass hysteria, and monastic suicide. That book was supposedly destroyed in the early 1700s, and yet Thomas had quoted it word for word. How? No copy was ever allowed outside of Europe, unless someone had brought it here, long before the seminary was built, a missionary perhaps, a mystic, or worse, someone hiding what it contained beneath a chapel, wrapped in pious intent, hoping it would never be found. But someone did find it, and that someone was Thomas. Weeks later, David Crane, the only student to survive, would write in a letter never sent. It wasn't sickness, it was knowledge. Forbidden knowledge. Something got in him, and once it did, it wanted more. This wasn't infection, it was activation. The chapel's library, where Thomas often studied alone, had been closed ever since, but a student saw something on the final night, something they would only whisper to David in the dark. He was reading from a black book, and it was reading back. Now ask yourself, what kind of book reads back, and what happens when its voice doesn't stay on the page? Keep listening. The pattern is just beginning. 3 days after Thomas died, James Morrison woke up screaming. The room was filled with the stench of sulfur. His mattress was soaked in sweat, but the sheets beneath him were ice cold. David Crane, now shaken to the core after watching one classmate die, tried to calm him, but James didn't recognize him. He was thrashing, muttering words that weren't English, weren't Latin, but sounded like both twisted together. His mouth moved faster than human breath should allow, and his eyes, God help us, his eyes were bleeding from the corners. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. This is not a story. It's a warning. James Morrison was brilliant, fluent in Greek, Hebrew, and Latin. He had memorized entire books of the Bible, but what came out of him that night wasn't scripture. It was a reversal. Psalms inverted, blessings turned into curses, verses spoken in reverse rhythm, like someone unweaving the word of God in real time. They pinned him down. He didn't scream. He laughed. When Dr. Whitley arrived again, his hands trembled. He hadn't slept since Thomas's death. And when he checked James's pulse, he felt the same erratic beat, like two hearts inside one chest. He tried to take blood, but the moment the needle pierced the skin, a thick black fluid oozed out. Not blood, not ink, something in between. It moved, like it was trying to escape. James died the next morning. His final words? Whispered, barely audible. It's inside the book now. Dr. Ashford demanded the students remain silent. He called an emergency assembly and delivered a controlled message. 2 unfortunate deaths, possibly foodborne illness. All would return to normal, but the students no longer trusted him, especially not David Crane, who began to notice something more terrifying than disease. Timing. Each victim was a member of the late-night theology study group. Each had spent time alone in the chapel within the same week. Each had, without telling the others, accessed the old wooden drawer behind the pulpit, the one no professor ever opened. And after each death, the air in the chapel grew heavier. David later wrote, "When I entered for evening prayer, I could feel something watching, but it wasn't above, it was beneath." 15 students would die. 2 were already gone. But the cause wasn't what they thought. The truth had to do with a ritual older than scripture, and a book that needed to be read. Because every death wasn't random, it was part of an unfolding sequence, one the church could not stop. The seminary called in Father Matthias from Rome. They didn't tell the students why. They said it was a spiritual audit, a harmless inspection of doctrine and discipline. But David Crane wasn't fooled. He saw the look in the bishop's eyes when Father Matthias arrived. Fear disguised as protocol. The kind of fear you don't admit in daylight. Father Matthias brought only one item with him, an obsidian crucifix etched with symbols David had never seen before. No, Roman, not Hebrew, older, and from the moment Matthias stepped inside the chapel, something shifted. The air turned dry. The old wooden beams groaned above the pulpit, though no wind stirred outside. The candles wouldn't hold flame. And during prayer, the youngest students heard murmurs from beneath the floorboards, syllables that sounded like names. Your name, my name, names of the dead. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Some truths aren't lost, they're buried alive. Father Matthias refused to sleep indoors. He set up a cot beneath the stars and fasted for 3 days. On the 4th, he summoned the faculty and demanded access to the chapel's foundation. Dr. Ashford hesitated until Matthias showed him something that silenced the room. A map, hand-drawn, unlabeled, but unmistakably this land, and at the center, a symbol that matched the carvings on the old pulpit. Not a cross, a spiral. Inside it, an open eye with no pupil. That symbol didn't represent God, it represented invitation. And beneath the chapel, where no blueprint mentioned anything at all, the map showed a sealed chamber, 11 feet by 11 feet, a perfect square, exactly the dimensions of a ritual pit used by certain pre-Christian sects exiled from Jerusalem in the 2nd century. Sects that believed in the awakening word, the belief that certain sounds, when read aloud in sequence, could bend reality. Not metaphor, not prayer, physics. David snuck a look at the map. In one corner, the words were written in shaky Latin, Verbum est lux, lux est exitium. The word is light. The light is destruction. That night, the last surviving member of the study group, Caleb Henley, was found inside the chapel, kneeling, eyes wide open, face turned to the ceiling, dead. On the wall behind him, written in that same black fluid, were 5 words. David Crane did not run. He knew. If he left the seminary grounds, whatever this was would follow. It wasn't the building. It wasn't even the book. It was him. He had read too far. On the 6th night after Caleb's death, David descended into the chapel alone. Midnight, no lantern, just the pale blue light of the moon filtering through stained glass, casting saints and martyrs across the floor like ghosts waiting for confession. He stood at the pulpit. The drawer, the one no professor touched, opened effortlessly, and inside was the book, not bound in leather, not even parchment. It looked like skin, stitched together crudely with thread made of something wrong. It was cold to the touch, even after being locked away for years. David turned one page, then another, then the air began to vibrate. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this story isn't legend, it's a trap. The book was handwritten, but not by any monk or scholar. The letters bent the eye. They shimmered subtly, as if resisting being understood. David later wrote in his journal, reading it was like falling through a hole in your own mind. On the 3rd page he saw his name. On the 5th page he saw dates, future dates, and beside them a list of initials. The first 2 matched Thomas and James. The 3rd was his own, with tonight's date. David slammed the book shut, but it was too late. The chapel walls began to bleed, not blood, salt water. The floorboards pulsed like a heartbeat beneath wood. Candles relit themselves in sequence, and the spiral symbol appeared, not on the book, but in his mind. Burning. That's when Father Matthias burst in. He dragged David from the pulpit and threw holy water onto the drawer. The book screeched. Not metaphor, not sound waves. It shrieked into the bones. Then Matthias did something no priest should ever do. He lit the altar on fire. Flames roared, unholy and golden. The book writhed in place like a living thing trying to escape the drawer, but Matthias held it shut with one hand, and with the other he began to chant, not Latin, not Hebrew, a counter-prayer, something older, something the Vatican erased from history in 1215. The chapel burned, but not to ash, to silence. And in that silence the book died, or so they believed, but David knew better, because as they watched the drawer collapse into soot, he looked down at his hand and saw the spiral burned into his palm. The book was never the threat. The threat was what it taught you to become. They buried the remains of the book deep in the seminary crypt. Father Matthias poured consecrated salt over the ashes, 7 layers, then sealed it in stone, marking the tomb with no name, just a broken circle carved into the rock. But David Crane could still feel it. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the words again. Only now they weren't just spoken. They were sung, low and cold, like a choir underwater, and sometimes not in his voice. 1 week after the fire, Father Matthias vanished. No one saw him leave. No one heard his car. His belongings were untouched. But on his cot outside, they found only one item, the obsidian crucifix. It was cracked clean through the center. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because sometimes the only warning you get is a silence that waits too long. The seminary declared the matter closed. Electrical fire, they said. Psychological stress. David was asked, politely, to take a leave of absence, but they didn't ask him to return the journal, or the photos, or the copied pages from the book he'd hidden in his dorm, because deep down the faculty knew this was no longer about theology, it was about containment. David returned to his apartment in Portland. But the spiral followed. It showed up in strange places, burned into toast, frozen in windshield frost, scrawled in the steam on his bathroom mirror. He began hearing a ticking sound. No source, no clock, just ticking. Worse, others began to notice. His neighbor's dog wouldn't go near him. Children crossed the street to avoid his shadow. And on 2 separate nights, he received anonymous phone calls from a voice that said only, "You are part of the sentence now." One night, David woke to find himself standing on his own roof. No memory of how he got there. Barefoot, shirtless, both palms burned raw, as if he'd tried to hold fire. He knew what this meant. The book hadn't been destroyed, it had rewritten itself, somewhere else, using him as the scribe, because that's what the word did. It didn't need belief, it didn't even need a reader, it just needed a mind willing to listen. And David Crane had listened too well. The spiral in his palm began to itch. Then it began to whisper. He tried to resist. David filled his apartment with light, floor lamps, candles, spotlights in every corner. He played white noise at all hours, slept in bursts, refused to read anything handwritten, even his own notes. But the spiral didn't care, because it wasn't outside him anymore. It was inside. One morning, he found the word seed scratched into the inside of his bathroom mirror, not written, scratched, from the inside of the glass. That same day, he discovered his left eye had turned completely black in photos. Not red, not reflective, black. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because when your reflection stops copying you, it's already too late. David went back to the seminary, broke in, descended into the crypt alone. What he found wasn't ashes. The drawer was intact. The spiral had regrown in the stone wall. This time, larger, pulsing slightly like a living thing fed by attention, and where the book had once burned, there was a new object, a box, wooden, ancient, wrapped in rusted chains no longer in. He didn't touch it, not yet. Instead, he opened his journal, the one he hadn't written in since the chapel burned, but the pages were full. Not his handwriting, not even ink, each page scrawled in a black, oily substance that smelled like seawater and iron. The sentences were fragmented, nonsensical, until one line repeated itself near the center of the book. "You are the 7th vessel. The word needs a mouth." That's when the box opened on its own. Inside was his face, not a mask, not a carving, his actual face, or something impossibly close. It blinked and whispered, "Thank you." David screamed, but no sound came out. His voice was gone, stolen, trapped in the box like a butterfly pinned under glass. And then came the final blow. He turned to run, and found himself staring into a mirror. No, not a mirror. Another David. Same face, same clothes, same burn mark. But he smiled and said, "You took too long. I spoke first." Then the other David turned and walked up the crypt stairs, leaving the real David behind, mute, alone, and now, inside the tomb. The crypt door slammed shut. No lock, no hinges, just sealed, as if the stone had never been cut. David's fists bled from pounding. No sound came. His voice was still caged in that box, staring up at him with his own expression. He was buried alive. But the spiral had other plans. It didn't want him dead, it wanted him listening, and so the walls began to speak. At first, soft humming, like Gregorian chant, but in a language that made his ears throb. Then came words, crawling into his skull. "You are vessel 7. The sentence has 6 before you, each erased, each improved. You are the mouth that remembers." He backed away, heart pounding, but there was no corner to hide in, only the spiral, glowing faintly now, growing larger. And then, out of the wall, 6 shapes began to emerge. Human, twisted, still alive. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because once you meet the others, you'll wish you were the first. They didn't blink, didn't breathe, just stood in a circle around him, their lips sewn shut with golden thread, spiral brands burned into their necks, eyes that had seen too much, and mouths that would never speak again. One of them reached for David, touched his throat, and the voice returned, not as a scream, but a whisper not his own. Tell them what you saw. Tell them it was never about belief. Tell them it was about permission. He fell to his knees. The others faded into the wall, leaving only the spiral, now spinning, slowly, rhythmic, almost hypnotic. David understood then. The word wasn't a message. It was a code, a living, adaptive pattern that could rewrite reality through language alone, and every person it touched became a draft, an unfinished sentence. It didn't need books. It didn't need pages. It only needed someone who would listen long enough to repeat it. And David Crane, seventh vessel, had already begun. He looked at his hands, the spiral now etched under the skin like veins of ink. And on the wall behind him, something new was being written, without chalk, without hands, just words appearing in sequence. Speak me. Let them hear. There are still 26 left to write. Above ground, life went on. Students filled the pews. Classes resumed. The seminary issued a bland press release about a minor electrical fire in the chapel. David Crane was listed as on sabbatical, but it wasn't David who walked the halls now. It was the other one, the one who had spoken first. Same voice, same laugh, same mild temper. But he didn't blink when you'd expect, didn't quite understand jokes anymore, and when he read scripture aloud, students said the words felt different, too alive, too sharp. And then the dreams began. Students reported waking up with spiral bruises on their wrists. Some woke to find strange phrases carved into the walls in their own handwriting. A girl fainted after seeing her reflection smile without her, and in the deepest part of the archives, the new David opened a forbidden drawer, one that hadn't existed before. Inside he placed a second box, not wooden, not chained. This one was made of bone, and it hummed. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what lives in that box is not a secret anymore. It's a seed, and it's looking for new soil. Weeks passed. Visitors to the seminary began vanishing. A guest lecturer from Prague, a mail carrier, one of the nuns who tended the graveyard. None of them were found. But their words were, written across the chapel ceiling in dripping black ink. Speak me, share me, birth me into the open mouth of man. One professor quit on the spot. Another went mad and plucked out his eyes. But the spiral didn't slow. It accelerated. Every sermon, every lecture, every blessing became a vehicle for transmission. The other David spoke with authority now, commanding, magnetic. Students who once questioned him now took notes like zealots. Some said they dreamed of him. Others said they dreamed as him. And one student, Eli Monroe, was caught scribbling spirals across his dorm room ceiling, chanting, "The sentence has teeth, the sentence has teeth." They institutionalized him, but he laughed as they dragged him away, and his final words were, "It's not a faith anymore, it's a vocabulary with a pulse." 3 states away, in a VA hospital in Ohio, a retired linguistics professor named Harold Finch awoke screaming, not from pain, not from a nightmare, but from a phrase. He repeated it over and over as nurses rushed in. The consonants are evolving, they're starting to bite. His charts were clean, no dementia, no trauma, just a sudden violent fluency, in a language no one recognized, but everyone feared. He didn't speak English anymore, only the spiral tongue, and the walls of his room began to sweat ink. Back at the seminary, David O., or the thing wearing David, stood at the pulpit during evening prayer. He opened the old leather Bible, not the one issued by the seminary, but an older one, bound in hide, inked in flesh colors, with no known author. The spiral was embossed on the cover. It was wet to the touch. He smiled, read aloud, and lo, the word became hunger, and it did not ask permission. Students wept. One convulsed. Another stood in a trance and whispered back, "I hear you. I remember you." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because after tonight, your voice may no longer be your own. In a remote monastery in Belarus, an entire room of monks died within minutes, each with identical black spirals burned into their tongues. No one had visited. No one had entered, but on the wall of their prayer room someone had scrawled, 10, transmission confirmed. That same night, security footage from the seminary showed David staring into the chapel camera for 7 hours, not moving, not blinking, just watching. And behind him, shadows that didn't belong to anybody danced in circles. The footage cut out at 3:33 a.m. When it resumed, David was gone. The altar was gone, and etched into the stone floor in spiraling lines that rotated clockwise as the eye tried to follow was a sentence no human could speak without bleeding. When 33 have heard, the sentence shall close its lips and swallow the sky. Outside, the moon flickered, and somewhere in Kansas, a 7-year-old boy stood in a cornfield, writing symbols in the dirt he'd never seen before, humming in a voice that wasn't his. The infection had begun, not of blood, not of flesh, but of language. 300 miles from the seminary, in a soundproofed radio booth in Des Moines, the late-night host of a paranormal talk show took a call from an anonymous number. The line crackled, then cleared, and what came through was not a voice. It was a sentence. 4 words spoken perfectly in unison by dozens of overlapping vocal cords. Male, female, child, elder, like a choir behind the veil. We are already speaking. The host laughed nervously, played it off, but in the days that followed he couldn't stop hearing it. In coffee cups, in light static, in the wind through his blinds at night, until he cracked live on air. Not with a scream, but with a recitation, a 15-minute stretch of impossible grammar and rhythm, spoken in that same inhuman harmony. He ended by whispering, 11, mouth number 4, and shot himself before the broadcast cut. The station's audio logs became corrupted, looping backwards until the tape melted. Back at the seminary, the students weren't students anymore. They walked the halls in perfect synchronization. They no longer blinked, and in their rooms they practiced syllables that could fracture glass and bruise walls. The administration issued no statement. The dean hadn't been seen in weeks. David, if you could still call him that, was teaching something new now, a course not listed in the catalog. Room 204, Thursday nights. The only requirement? You had to speak the spiral aloud. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the next mouth may be yours, and it doesn't ask permission before it opens. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a linguist in Oxford cracked open a medieval grimoire known as the Groaning Ledger. Inside, she found a letter tucked between the pages, undated, unsigned, inked in something dark and flaking. To those who teach the spiral, beware. It does not wish to be taught. It wishes to be spoken, and once spoken, it will never be silent again. She burned the book the same night, but she still mutters spiral phrases in her sleep, and her colleagues say she no longer reads in straight lines. The infection isn't about belief, it's about phonetics. It spreads not through faith but through fluency, and every time someone listens, the spiral tightens. It was the janitor who first found the walls whispering, not in metaphor, not in madness, literal whispering, from the plaster itself. He leaned in, thinking it might be rodents, but the wall exhaled hot breath and said, "Mouth number 7 is under the floorboards." He quit the same night, shaking, refusing to speak, but his voicemail kept dialing the seminary on loop. Empty silence for 13 seconds, then one word in reverse, "Remember." They found him days later, outside St. Erasmus Cathedral in Boston, arms outstretched in a crucifix position, tongue missing, spiral carved into his gums, not dead, praying, and praying in a language no priest recognized. Across the country, old churches began reporting mass hallucinations. Hymns sung backwards, children drawing spirals on pews, the same phrase appearing in different Bibles across state lines, words that weren't there the night before. When the 13th mouth opens, even God must listen. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the word is moving again, and state lines won't stop it. Meanwhile, a retired Marine chaplain in North Carolina sent an encrypted email to his former unit. The subject line simply read, "It's back." Attached was a photo from 2003, taken in Fallujah. A corpse, charred black, smiling ear to ear, its mouth stitched shut with pages from a Gideon Bible. Around it, the same spirals drawn in ash and oil. The caption on the back of the photo, "We burned it and it laughed." No one replied. Not even the dead man's brother, who was later found in his garage surrounded by mirrors, all etched with spirals. His throat was intact, but every mirror had his reflection screaming. At the seminary, David had begun the final phase. The students were silent now, not mute, just listening. Every night, one more student went missing. No cries, no signs of struggle, just a faint trail of ink, leading to the old boiler room. They say that's where the first mouth opened, the one that whispered the original sentence, the sentence that unwrote a priest, and what it whispered is still classified in Vatican archives. But a copy was found inside a dream journal kept by a 7-year-old girl in Arizona. She drew it in spiral script, and beneath it, in crayon, she wrote, "This isn't a story. It's an invitation." In a forgotten wing of the seminary, bricked off since 1908, construction workers unearthed a chamber behind a false wall. No records, no floor plans, just stone, sweat, and silence. Inside, a circle of 13 wooden chairs faced inward. Each was carved with the same phrase in Latin, "Vocem si audieris, responde." If you hear the voice, answer. But one chair was missing, the 13th. In its place sat a mold of ash and teeth. No bones, just a black spiral etched into the floor, burnt so deep the rock itself had warped, as if something beneath had clawed upward, begging to be heard. The foreman, a non-religious man, left immediately. He didn't tell his crew why. But 3 nights later, he mailed a thumb drive to the seminary with no return address. On it, a single audio file, 6 seconds long. One voice whispered, "Chair 13, still waits." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if you're hearing this, you're already nearer to it than you think. In Kansas, a Catholic boarding school closed overnight after parents reported a pattern among the children. All 13 students in Dorm B woke at 3:13 a.m. for 13 nights in a row, each reciting different parts of the same sentence, backwards. Together, they completed it, and when stitched together and played forward, the sentence had no grammar, no logic, no linguistic structure, but it made the language software crash. The school's priest attempted an exorcism. He was found kneeling in the chapel, humming a note no one could identify, a frequency known to shatter underwater microphones. A week later, he was blind. Not from trauma, from overexposure to unseen glyphs. He claimed he could still see, just not the world we know. He wrote on the walls of his cell, "The 13th chair isn't empty, it's listening." And then one final note, written in spiral script on his ceiling. "When the spiral reaches your tongue, you won't speak, you'll echo." Back at the seminary, David was no longer speaking English, or Hebrew, or Latin, but something older. Each sentence he uttered made the lights dim, the air tighten. They weren't lectures anymore. They were rituals. And every time he finished, a door opened in a place no one had noticed before. A door that hadn't been there the day before. Beyond it, a pitch-black staircase descending too far. And at the bottom, a voice that sounded like your own, begging you not to come closer. They thought it was just psychological, the staircase that wasn't on the blueprints. A trick of old architecture, unstable minds, or sleep deprivation. Until a faculty member named Father Langdon volunteered to descend. He was ex-military, skeptical, a theologian trained in rational inquiry. He took a flashlight, a rosary, and a handheld recorder. That was on a Thursday. The next day, his recorder was mailed anonymously to the seminary in a box covered with ash. Inside was just static. For 13 minutes. Then, without warning, Langdon's voice whispered, "I didn't walk down, I fell upward." And then a faint second voice echoed through the static. "There are no stairs, only invitations. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this story doesn't stay put. It travels in names, in whispers, in bloodlines. They found Langdon's rosary at the chapel door, but the beads were no longer wooden. They were teeth, human, infant says. 13 of them. At the same moment across the country, 13 churches reported the same anomaly, crucifixes turning upside down by themselves at exactly 3:13 a.m. One security camera in a Louisiana chapel captured the motion, not mechanical, not wind. They moved as if responding to something unseen, something beneath them, something counting down. David, meanwhile, was no longer eating, no longer sleeping. He simply sat and whispered all day, all night. His voice never rose, but the walls began to change, not visibly, texturally, soft, pliable, warm. A biology professor who examined them touched one panel too long. He screamed, yanked his hand away. Later in the infirmary, he told the nurse, the wall had a pulse. He died 2 days later, autopsy inconclusive, but the attending medical examiner was arrested after sketching a spiral into the corpse's chest cavity during the procedure. He didn't know why. He just said, "It asked me." The Vatican, now unable to contain the story, quietly reinstated a dormant division, Congregatio Silenti, the Congregation of Silence. Their job? Seal and erase. They arrived unmarked, silent, and with a relic sealed in wax, an ancient box said to contain a vocal fragment of a seraph that defied God. They placed the box in the seminary's chapel. Immediately the organ began to play. No organist, no power, just one note, held endlessly, until blood began dripping from the pipes. At exactly 3:13 a.m., every bell tower on the seminary grounds began ringing. No wind, no human hands, just thunderous, synchronized tolls, 13 in total, echoing like screams across the stone walls. Students woke vomiting ash. One, a theology major named Leah, claimed she saw a figure standing in her dorm mirror. Not behind her, not beside her, inside the mirror. The reflection didn't move when she did. It only whispered, "He's no longer in the 13th chair. He's walking the halls." Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because once you've heard the tolls, you're already part of the pattern. 13 stories, tall and sinking. Later that week, a janitor named Darius went missing after reporting a deep, rotting draft coming from the locked archives beneath the library. They found his mop, but no Darius. Just a note on the floor, etched in floor polish with a trembling hand. He's not locked in. We are. When Father Abram of the Congregatio Silenti opened the ancient box in the chapel to contain the phenomena, he found it empty, except for a slip of parchment. On it, one line, "Your silence was not enough." That night, the walls began speaking back, low moans at first, then coherent sentences, layered voices from no visible source. Audio analysis revealed 13 distinct vocal tones, all perfectly harmonized, all speaking different languages. One was extinct, another, not from this planet. The head linguist collapsed, translating the oldest sentence, "We were here when your son was young." In the physics lab, lights began bending, not flickering, bending, as if space was folding, and through those folds, faculty began seeing brief flashes, impossible geometry, cathedrals built upside down, a sky that moved like flesh. David, who had been silent for days, spoke again, this time not in a whisper, but in a choir. 13 voices, layered and spiraling from his throat. They said, "You lit 13 candles, but the 14th shadow still stands." And then he smiled, not like a human, like a mask finally tired of hiding. A senior staff member took a photo of him in that moment, but when the photo developed, David wasn't there. In his place, a spiral made of chairs. 13, all facing you. The seminary chapel was closed that morning. Officially, they claimed it was for restoration. Unofficially, every priest inside had lost their ability to speak. Not from trauma, from something else. Their tongues were still there, but twisted, knotted into impossible loops, as if something rewrote their anatomy from within. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, Because some names once spoken begin to speak you back. David had vanished. His room was found empty, except for 13 drawings, charcoal on parchment, each depicting the same figure. Not a man, not a beast, not even alive. Its body was composed of stairs, twisting upward forever with no top. And on each step, a seminary student, mouth open, eyes gouged out, praying upward to something just beyond the page. Security footage caught David walking into the chapel an hour before he vanished, but not through the door, through the wall. The plaster didn't break. It opened like skin recognizing an old friend. He stepped through without hesitation, and the wall closed behind him. Later, when they checked the recording, they noticed something far worse. David wasn't walking alone. There were 12 shadows beside him, not cast by light, but by memory, each matching a student who had died at the seminary since its founding, including names that weren't public, names only the Vatican should have known. Inside the chapel, the relic box now pulsed faintly, like a heartbeat. When Father Abram approached, it spoke, not audibly, not in his ear, but in his bones. The 13th chair is not a seat, it is a womb. And with that, the stained glass windows shattered inward. Every shard rearranged on the chapel floor into a spiral, again, always the spiral, always 13 turns. That night, students began waking with identical bruises, 13 marks along the spine, like steps, each bruise descending toward the base of the back where a single word was scrawled beneath the skin. Not ink, not blood, something older, something watching, the word, a scent. And in that moment across the seminary, every locked door opened at once. At 3:00 a.m. sharp, every lock at St. Arno Theological Seminary clicked open, not slammed, not broken, just walled. Dozens of heavy wooden doors, some sealed for decades, swung open in perfect synchrony, as if obeying a forgotten command. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if the doors are opening for you, it means something already knows you're listening. Students wandered the halls in a trance, barefoot, eyes unfocused, mouthing words they didn't understand. They all moved toward the same place, the basement archives, the part of the seminary no one had entered since 1932, the part beneath the old chapel where, according to the blueprints, nothing existed, but something did. Security footage from the West Wing shows 37 students descending into the basement. Only 36 came back up. When asked who was missing, no one could answer. Not no one knew. No one could speak the name. Their mouths seized up, tongues twitching, vocal cords paralyzed. One student, Julia Renner, managed to scribble the missing name onto a napkin during breakfast. As soon as she did, her hands began bleeding through the fingertips. The name, Matthias. A name not on any record, no enrollment, no student file, no dorm assignment, but his room was found. Dormitory C, room 314. Inside, 13 identical black coats all hung perfectly. No dust, no scent, just cold. And on the desk, an envelope sealed with red wax. Inside, a single page, typed, in Latin, "He who completes the spiral must ascend. He who ascends cannot return." Below that, 13 fingerprints, burned into the paper. Julia disappeared that same night, but not before she called her mother from the payphone. The audio of that call is preserved. She says, "It's not David, it never was. He was just the door. The real one's older, deeper. We thought we were the students, but we're the offering." Then, silence, except for 13 seconds of faint breathing, followed by a 30th breath. Not human, something deeper, wetter, hungrier. The phone line melted at the switchboard, literally melted, and the recording, still warm to the touch. They called it a containment protocol, but by then, there was nothing left to contain. The seminary's eastern wing collapsed inward, yet no explosion was heard, no tremor. The bricks simply folded, like they'd lost the memory of how to be a building. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if a structure can forget its shape, what makes you think your mind can't do the same? Buried beneath the rubble were 13 coffins, each nailed shut from the inside. The wood wasn't oak, not pine, but something older, veined, breathing. When the rescue team opened one, inside was a boy, still alive, but his mouth was sewn shut with threads of human hair. They tried to cut them. The blades turned to ash. Each coffin had no nameplate, only a symbol, a staircase spiraling up into a dark eye. The Vatican archivists flew in that same night. No passports, no customs. They brought one item with them, a mirror, polished obsidian, framed in teeth. When they held it near the coffins, it didn't reflect light. It consumed it. Everything around the mirror dimmed. Light, color, and sound had been drained from the air. One priest stared into the glass too long. When he finally looked away, he screamed until his voice box burst. He had gouged 13 perfect spirals into the flesh of his chest, using nothing but his own fingernails. The mirror was then locked inside the seminary vault. But here's what you're not supposed to know. It was opened again. 6 months later, by the Dean. Dean Harold Carver, age 63. No history of mental illness. No known religious deviation. He was found kneeling before the mirror, naked, weeping. His spine had been surgically removed, but no tools were used. No cuts. It had slid out, as if offered. Placed beside him on the chapel altar was his final message, carved into the floor with a femur bone. The stairway has no steps. The body is the lane. Dare. I am already ascending. And beneath that, a new symbol, not carved, branded, burned into the stone floor, a fetus, crowned, smiling, with 13 fingers. What happened next never made the papers, but it did make the morgue logs. All 13 members of the seminary's board of directors were found dead within 48 hours, each in a different state, each with their mouths removed. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if you start dreaming of voices that don't have mouths, you may already be listening to something that never needed one. One was found in a Kentucky motel bathtub, surrounded by salt water and live barnacles. Another was discovered inside his locked Lexus, parked in a Nevada desert, yet frozen solid from the inside. In every case, the dental record remained intact, but the entire mouth cavity, teeth, jaw, tongue, gums, was gone. Not severed, not removed, just absent. As if the face had forgotten that it ever needed a mouth. The coroner's report for Dr. Ellis Grant, found in Philadelphia, notes an even more disturbing detail. His throat contained pollen, 13 varieties, all extinct, and one of the flowers that pollen came from was a perfect match for the one embroidered on the St. Arnaud Seminary chapel curtain, the same curtain that was never meant to be opened. Behind that curtain was a painted mural. It had been sealed behind layers of plaster for almost a century. When revealed, it showed a grotesque tableau. 13 figures in black robes kneeling around a spiral staircase made of human limbs. At the top of the staircase stood a faceless child with outstretched arms. But the most horrifying part, the 13th figure was still being painted. The brush was midair, still wet, still suspended, but no painter was present. Infrared analysis confirmed the pigment was human blood, and the DNA, not one match in the global database, not even partial. Like the blood never belonged to Earth. After the mural's discovery, the restoration team went missing, every single one. Except for the intern, Lisa Hammond, who had locked herself in the supply closet and chewed off her own fingers to keep from drawing. Over and over she repeated, "Don't finish the 13th, don't finish the 13th." When asked what would happen if someone did, she wept and whispered, "Then the mouthless will speak." 3 weeks later, a new voice was heard beneath the chapel floor. Not echo, not plumbing. A voice, speaking in reverse Latin, chanting in perfect rhythm with the tolling of the seminary bell. But here's the horror. The bell hadn't rung in 84 years. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if you ever hear a sound that hasn't sounded in your lifetime, run before it finishes the sentence. Audio specialists were brought in from DC and Munich. They confirmed the impossible. The voice wasn't bouncing off the walls. It was coming from below, not beneath the building, beneath the stone. A geologist on site used ground-penetrating radar to check for caverns. Instead, he found a spiral-shaped cavity, extending 213 feet straight down, perfectly smooth, perfectly cylindrical, and inside, movement. Thermal imaging showed a single cold spot, shifting, slowly ascending. Not an animal, not a person. The heat signature had no form, but it was getting closer. Within 2 days, the seminary staff was relocated, not for safety, but for containment. Only 2 were left behind. Father Miles, the Vatican's assigned watcher, and Sister Celine, the nun who never slept. Each kept journals, only hers survived. Inside, she described dreams that were not hers. Memories of ancient catacombs, rituals performed with knives made of children's teeth, and something called the throat without voice. She wrote, "It doesn't want to speak. It wants us to say it for it. It presses on the inside of our minds. It drills symbols into the softest parts of our memory, then waits for us to think we made them." On the final night, her last journal entry was just 2 words. It blinked. When they entered her quarters, they found her body intact, but flat. Every organ had been compressed. Her skin, paper thin. Her eyes, gone. Not scooped or torn, just missing, like they had turned inward and stitched themselves shut from the inside. At the foot of her bed was the chapel curtain, the one that had covered the mural. Someone had written across it, using ashes, "You can hide the stairway, but you can't unbuild the climb." By spring of that year, the seminary was permanently shuttered. Not sold, not demolished, simply erased from jurisdiction. No land deeds, no federal oversight, no public record of its existence beyond a few archived theology journals, and even those are now redacted. But the nightmares didn't stop. They spread. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because once the dream spreads to your town, it's already too late to wake up. A retired professor in Vermont began sketching the spiral staircase during sleep. When he woke, his own teeth were missing, but no blood, no trauma, just absence. In Arizona, a mother of 3 began speaking in a language no one could identify until a linguist revealed it matched a Babylonian dialect lost over 4,000 years ago. The phrase she repeated? "The 13th is almost whole." In Chicago, an entire church choir went missing during midnight rehearsal. Only thing left behind? A single cassette tape with 13 voices humming in unison. Then silence. Then a wet chewing sound, as if mouths were growing where none should be. Even in the digital space, strange glitches began. YouTube channels unrelated to theology began receiving random bursts of audio, backmasked phrases, untraceable. One Twitch streamer, mid-broadcast, heard a knock on his wall from inside. He laughed until his webcam glitched, froze. And for 3 seconds, viewers swear they saw a second face behind his own. No eyes, no mouth, just skin, twitching. That clip has since vanished, along with the streamer, and all 28,000 of his followers now receive emails in dead languages, same timestamp, same message, draw the child's arms again. Back in Massachusetts, Sister Celine's journal was finally analyzed under ultraviolet light. On the last page, where the ink had faded, forensic teams uncovered a hidden diagram. A ritual circle made of 13 teeth, 12 marked with astrological signs. The 13th? No symbol, just the words, "For the one who never had a birthday." And beneath that, a warning scratched with a fingernail: "Don't sing on a spiral staircase, because that's how you open it." In late summer, a historian from Boston named Dr. Eliza March uncovered a sealed envelope tucked inside an old Jesuit ledger dated 1813. The paper was unusually thick, almost like skin parchment. Inside, a sketch of the seminary's chapel floor, before the mural, before the renovations, back when it was still a dirt cellar. And in the center, a child's outline, head turned sideways, no arms, just a single note beneath it. He crawls until we ask him to stand. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because when something that never stood begins to rise, your town's name will be the last thing it remembers. Dr. March brought the sketch to the Massachusetts Historical Society, hoping to cross-reference the chapel's original layout. 3 days later, her lab caught fire. No accelerant, no faulty wiring, just spontaneous combustion, centered on her desk. Everything was destroyed, except the envelope, now slightly warmer. Eliza survived but began exhibiting strange behavior. She refused to sleep indoors. She claimed she could hear children humming from beneath her floors, even in hotel rooms, even in her car. She tried to drown, and the envelope in the Charles River. It floated for 13 hours, then vanished. Security footage from the hotel where she last stayed shows her pacing in the hallway at 3:06 a.m., eyes wide, mouth stitched shut with black thread. The thread traced back to a textile mill in France. The mill was shut down in 1902 for manufacturing burial cloth for children who died during unbaptized exorcisms. The seminary's name was on the purchase ledger. All this would be discarded as coincidence, if not for the voice message Eliza left on her mother's phone just before disappearing. The recording begins with static, then sobbing, then whispering, "He has my name," then silence, then 13 knocks, each louder than the last, then the voice of a boy, soft, calm, too calm. He says, "Tell the others to kneel. I don't know how to use arms, but I remember what they're for." That message was traced, not to a cell tower, but to a location 213 feet directly beneath the seminary ruins, where no signal should ever reach. In the fall of that same year, the Archdiocese of Boston quietly assigned Father Thomas Eames, a crisis containment priest specializing in post-exorcism trauma, to investigate the rumors surrounding the La Toya Seminary ruins. He was told it was merely folklore, a case study in rural hysteria, and that no further escalation was expected. He was also told not to spend the night. He didn't listen. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because when even the church starts lying to its own priests, you know something older than faith has begun to move. Father Eames arrived at the site with a lantern, a digital recorder, and a consecrated crucifix worn thin from years of use. His initial notes were procedural, temperature readings, ground moisture, debris logs, but by 2:44 a.m., his voice begins to change on the recorder, slower, detached, like he's being echoed by something behind him. Then the questions start. Who was the 13th? Why did they bury his hands in separate graves? If the mouth is sealed, how is he still singing? The crucifix, recovered days later, was bent into a spiral. His final transmission, captured in a fragmented whisper, says, "I found the hymn. It's not in Latin, it's not in any language. It's what the body sings to itself when there's no soul left." After that, the audio descends into low-frequency hums, so deep they caused tremors in the analysis lab's equipment. Spectrogram analysis revealed what looked like teeth marks carved into the waveform. The priest was never found, but something else was. His lantern, still warm, placed neatly at the base of the old spiral staircase, a place that, according to official records, was collapsed and sealed in 1903. Yet there it stood, pristine. 13 steps exactly, curving into pitch black and smeared along the inside of the stone in a dark brown hue. Handprints, small, childlike, but with 6 fingers each, all dragging downward. Forensics confirmed, not paint, not blood, but amniotic fluid, fresh, still warm to the touch. And beneath the staircase, someone had scratched a single phrase into the foundation wall. This time, he keeps the arms. A month after Father Eames vanished, a government team quietly arrived in La Toya under the guise of environmental inspection. No names, no insignias, just 6 men in dark suits with radiation badges and ground-penetrating sonar. Locals called them the Quiet Men. They spoke to no one. They slept in their truck. They left at nightfall, except one didn't leave. His body was found slumped against the chapel ruins at dawn. No wounds, no struggle, but his lips were sewn shut. From the inside, hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from. Because when even the government sends nameless men and they come back in pieces, you're not dealing with folklore. You're standing at the edge of something biblical. The report, what little was leaked, described a subterranean cavity beneath the seminary grounds, perfectly circular, walls lined with salt and iron. The strange part? The cavity wasn't dug. It was grown, as if something biological had shaped it over time. The interior was covered in claw-like carvings, each set arranged in spirals, but none matched human physiology. The team called it the womb, but that's not the worst part. In the center of the chamber sat a chair, carved from femurs, held together with dried muscle, and seated in the chair, facing the wall, was a life-sized wooden effigy of a boy. No arms, no eyes, no mouth, but the wood, elm, and when carbon dated, it came back as being only 6 days old. Impossible. The carving was centuries old, and when they lifted the effigy, they found a single artifact beneath it. A tooth, too long to be human, too flat to be animal, and inscribed along the gum line in tiny obsessive script were the words, "He's learning to chew." The body of the dead agent was sent to Quantico. During the autopsy, the coroner found something stitched into his stomach lining, a message burned into the tissue with precision laser etching. It read, "Stop sending men, send back what you took," but the records show nothing was ever taken, except the children, 13 of them, in 1847, all unbaptized, all forgotten. 3 weeks after the incident at the Seminary ruins, the last living nun from the original Latoya order, Sister Agnes Miro, spoke publicly for the first time. She was 102 years old, blind, bedridden, and locked away in a private Catholic care home outside Boston under Vatican seal. But on October 12th, she broke her vow of silence. She screamed all night until her tongue split in two. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because when a nun who hasn't spoken since the Hoover administration starts naming the unborn, something ancient is trying to be heard. The nurses who rushed to her room found claw marks gouged into the ceiling above her bed, not scratches, ritual glyphs, and they weren't there the day before. Even more disturbing, Sister Agnes had no mobility in her arms. Her muscles had long atrophied. Her nails were clean, no blood, no splinters. So who wrote them? When asked what happened, she whispered one sentence before slipping into a coma. "I baptized the wrong one." The church sealed the room within the hour. But a hidden microphone installed by an investigative journalist caught what happened next. At 2:03 a.m. in perfect Latin, the comatose Sister Agnes began singing. But her vocal cords had been removed in 1963 after a tumor surgery. The voice wasn't hers. And the song? It matched the inaudible frequencies from Father Eames's final tape, the body hymn as it's now known, a composition not meant for ears but organs. What came next was worse. At the exact moment the recording ended, every window in the facility, 68 in total, exploded outward. From the inside, patients reported seeing hands pushing through the mirrors, not reflections, not hallucinations, hands with 6 fingers, dripping with black fluid. Security footage shows nothing, except for 3 seconds. Every camera in the building was focused on room 44, Sister Agnes's room. And in those 3 seconds, a figure can be seen standing behind her bed, not touching, not moving, just watching. A small figure, armless, faceless, but very much alive and breathing. The footage was suppressed within hours, hard drives confiscated, staff interrogated. The Vatican declared it a hoax fueled by local hysteria. But there's one thing they didn't count on, a backup. The night nurse, 26-year-old Emily Carr, had been documenting Sister Agnes's final days on her personal phone, part of a grad school project on aging and memory. And on that phone, she caught something no one could explain. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what Emily saw through her lens wasn't just a figure. It was the boy. The same boy from the effigy. Standing, breathing, blinking. But when she looked up from her phone, he wasn't there, only visible through glass. And what's worse, he saw her. For the next 6 nights, Emily refused to sleep. She left the facility, quit school, moved in with her mother. But the dreams came anyway. Every night, the same sequence. She's standing in a hallway of mirrors, each one reflecting a different version of herself, older, younger, deformed, missing parts. And in every reflection, the boy walks closer, always smiling, never blinking. On the 7th night, she woke up with blood in her ears and something carved into her thigh, backward, as if done in a mirror. She took a photo. The message read, I don't want your eyes, I want your name. She checked her birth certificate. The ink on her first name had vanished. Her ID still read Emily Carr, but her name, the one inside her head, the one that felt like her, was suddenly wrong. She described feeling unstitched, like her identity had been unraveled one thread at a time. And then the worst part. On October 19th, she walked into the Boston Harbor at 3:44 a.m., fully clothed, eyes open, still smiling. They found her body 3 days later, floating upright, arms raised like she was waiting for baptism. Inside her mouth, they found two things: a child's tooth and a handwritten note sealed in wax that read, "She saw the mirror. She gave her name. The others will follow." Emily was the first in a series. By Christmas, 7 others who'd viewed the footage, journalists, nurses, even a priest, had died under similar circumstances. All of them saw the boy, all of them heard the hymn, and all of them gave him something. The Vatican issued a global silence order under Protocol Enoch 7, a rarely invoked clause used only 3 times in modern church history. The footage of the boy was labeled non-canonical, the deaths classified as unrelated. But behind closed doors, a different term was being used: inverted ascension. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the truth is, something ancient isn't trying to break in, it's trying to rise up from beneath. The Church's own records, those buried inside the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, described inverted ascension as the reverse of divine resurrection, not spirit into body, but body into void, a transference of human essence into something unformed, a gestation of anti-being. And the boy? He wasn't a ghost. He was a vessel. According to leaked fragments from an exorcist's dossier dated 1848, the same year Latoya's seminary collapsed, the Church intercepted letters between priests at the time that hinted at a mirror child born from ritual deviation, a byproduct of failed genealogical purification. In simpler terms, they were trying to create the perfect vessel, not for Christ, but for the nameless one beneath, a being so ancient it has no language, no face, no true form, only intention. It doesn't possess, it copies. It takes memory, voice, body, and reconstructs them inside itself, mirror first, which explains the boy's form, why he only appears through reflection, why he doesn't blink, because he's not just a child, he's everyone who's seen him, a collage of borrowed flesh, stitched together from names willingly given. And once he has your name, you're no longer protected, not by prayer, not by medicine, not even by death. Because what the Vatican feared most wasn't demonic possession, it was spiritual substitution, one soul replaced, quietly, permanently, and the body left behind, still smiling, still walking, still you, until someone notices you're no longer casting a reflection. The boy's reflection was last seen in a shattered mirror inside St. Callista's archive room, recorded on a hidden CCTV feed never meant to exist. The footage showed a janitor named Benjamin Ortiz polishing the floor just past midnight. He walks by a cabinet lined with antique mirrors, but as he passes, something lags. In real time, Ben walks forward, but in the mirror, he stops, turns, and stares back at himself. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what happened next is more than surveillance. It's ritual. Ben's reflection raises its hand. Before he does, Ben flinches, rubs his eyes, and walks off. But the mirror version stays, smiling, breathing, waiting. 37 minutes later, Ben returns with a trash bin. The camera glitches just for one frame. And in that split second, there are 2 Bens. One pushing the bin, the other standing behind him, identical, but only one casts a shadow. The Vatican confiscated the tape within 12 hours, but forensic analysts from an underground theology collective known as the Splinter Choir managed to intercept the data via a backdoor server. They broke it down frame by frame, and that's when they noticed something none of the church officials mentioned. In the very last frame, just as the video cuts, Ben's name tag falls off. Not by accident. It melts, as if it had been burned from the inside out. 3 weeks later, Benjamin Ortiz was found 200 miles away in an abandoned Jesuit outpost, nude, kneeling, head shaved, hands in prayer position but fused at the knuckles like bone had turned to wax. He was still breathing, but when he opened his mouth he didn't speak. He sang, the exact same hymn Sister Agnes whispered in her death trance, word for word, but with a voice that wasn't his, not human, not digital, something between, and here's what horrified the investigators most. Every time Ben inhaled, the air behind him shimmered, not like heat, but like glass, as if something on the other side was watching and learning how to breathe. The final sealed report from the Vatican labeled the Benjamin Ortiz incident as a liturgical mimicry event, but the term barely scratches the surface. What they were dealing with was not possession, it was replacement through ritual erosion, a wearing down of the soul until something else could slip inside unnoticed. And according to that report, Benjamin wasn't the first, he was the 7th. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because if what the church feared is true, the Mirror Boy doesn't just watch, he recruits. 7 cases, 7 reflections that refused to move, 7 people found in impossible places, speaking with voices that didn't match their vocal cords. Each victim was marked by one consistent anomaly, the loss of their shadow, not metaphorically, literally. Security footage would show them walking past street lamps, candles, floodlights, yet casting nothing, as if light passed through them but never noticed them. But there's something else, something buried in a 1567 manuscript stored in the Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Forbidden Books Archive. Written by a condemned monk named Father Elias Montrois, the text was never translated into Latin. It remained in an archaic dialect of Occitan, hidden until 1993. Its title, Reflexio Inversa, the inverted reflection. In it, Montrois describes a figure born not from God, nor the devil, but from the moment Eve first looked into water and saw herself, a being that was not cursed, but waiting for a name. Montrois claimed this being could only enter the world through consensual recognition. A person had to see it and believe it was real. That was the contract. That was the doorway. Which brings us back to LaToya. Her medical file contained a chilling note from the final nurse to see her conscious. It read, "Patty," and looked past me into the wall mirror, whispered, "I see you," then smiled and fell unconscious. Room temperature dropped instantly. No drugs, no trauma, just a whisper and recognition. She saw it, she accepted it, and according to the Vatican's hidden doctrine, once accepted, the mirror no longer shows your reflection, it shows your replacement, and if you stare too long, you won't remember which one you were. 3 months after LaToya's final mirror incident, her body vanished. No record of discharge, no paperwork, no security footage. Just an empty hospital bed, the mattress soaked in condensation, and a single note left under the pillow, handwritten in perfect Latin, though LaToya never studied the language. The translation? She has been mirrored. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this is the moment the Vatican escalated the case from anomaly to containment breach. They shut down the entire psychiatric wing, burned the bed frame, replaced every mirror in the building with hammered bronze. But none of that mattered, because in the days that followed, nurses started reporting a strange phenomenon, each of them, at separate times, seeing LaToya's reflection appear behind them in mirrors they knew had been removed, and every time they turned around, no one was there. But the room would be colder, the glass would fog, and faint humming, always the same melody, would linger in the air. The same melody Sister Agnes hummed before she died. The same melody Benjamin Ortiz sang with lips that weren't his. And the same melody recorded in Reflexio Inversa, listed as the Canticle of Return, a song believed to summon not the entity itself, but the place it waits within. An ancient plane behind reflection, a reverse sanctuary. Scripture hidden in the margins of Montrois' manuscript speaks of a chamber between worlds, the cat. Hedral beyond the pain, a sanctuary constructed not from stone but from perception, a place that only exists when believed in, a prison that becomes a portal once the prisoner is worshipped. The boy Latoya saw, the one with backward eyes and a mouth that didn't close, was not an entity of flesh. He was a lure, a face designed to be remembered, to be believed. Because belief in this framework isn't a virtue, it's an invitation. And once someone believes deeply enough, their reflection stops being a copy and starts being a messenger. A janitor at the hospital, Luis Mendoza, was the next to go. He wasn't part of the case, didn't know about Latoya, didn't speak English well, just a quiet man who cleaned the psychiatric wing's hallways at night. Until one morning, he never came home. They found his mop bucket spilled in front of room 312, and the mirror in the utility closet, though shattered weeks ago, had somehow reassembled itself. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because what they found written on that glass in condensation was never meant to be read by anyone outside the Vatican. 4 words. It wants the believer. Luis was eventually discovered, but not in the hospital, not in the city. He turned up 600 miles away, wandering barefoot along a highway in Ohio, muttering the same sentence over and over, "She's learning to smile like me." When police tried to speak with him, Luis refused to look anyone in the eye. He stared at puddles, at glass, at car windows, anything reflective. When asked who she was, he began to sob. "The one I left behind the pain." The neurologist who examined him wrote that Luis's brain activity mimicked patterns usually seen in severe schizophrenia or long-term hallucinogen use, but neither applied. What disturbed her more was the EEG pattern itself. The signal was mirrored, left-right orientation reversed, brain hemispheres communicating backward, as if something inside him had rewired the pathways, not for chaos, but for inversion. And that's when the final note in the Vatican file appears. A handwritten page from Cardinal Moretti, one of the last clergy members to investigate the case before the file was buried. He wrote, "They are not demons in the traditional sense. They do not possess, they replace. A perfect echo that slowly learns to act, speak, even think like the original. But there's always one flaw, one tell. They smile before you speak." That's the warning carved into the oak frame of the hidden mirror room in the Church of St. Elmo, the one sealed after the Latoya case. Beware the smile that arrives early, because if it smiles before you do, it's already been watching. 6 months after Latoya's disappearance, the hospital shut down permanently. Official reason: structural mold. Unofficial reason: every remaining patient began reporting the same dream. A cathedral made of mirrors, and inside that cathedral, a girl in a hospital gown stood at the altar, not praying but watching them, each of them, smiling too wide, too early. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because the final incident in this case was not reported by the hospital, the clergy, or any government body. It was discovered through a leak. A hospice nurse in Milwaukee, a woman with no connection to Latoya or St. Elmo's, began documenting strange end-of-life phenomena in elderly patients. In their last days, several unrelated patients whispered the same 3 things. "She's behind the glass again. It's learning to walk outside. Don't let it see you first." But here's the real nightmare. One of those patients, an 89-year-old woman with no family, died on a rainy Tuesday. The nurse went to clean the body. As she closed the curtains, she noticed the window had fogged over from the inside, and on the glass there was writing. Tiny fingerprints, child-sized, spelling out, "Hello again, Sister Agnes." But Sister Agnes had died a year ago, in Indianapolis, in Latoya's room. What followed triggered the Vatican's Emergency Occult Response Team, Unit 8, the Red Veil. They arrived within 36 hours, destroyed the window, confiscated the nurse's notes, erased all medical files for that patient from the hospital's digital database, and yet the most chilling piece remains unredacted, buried inside a surviving log, a note written by one of the Red Veil agents after conducting a mirror inspection ritual. He wrote, "I looked too long. It smiled first. And now I can feel her walking in my skin, trying it on like a dress, smiling from the inside. She's almost ready." The log ends with one last, hastily scribbled line, scrawled so hard it tore the page. The mirror doesn't need you to look into it anymore. It looks into you. They sealed the final report in a black archive beneath Castel Gandolfo. No digital copy exists, only a handwritten transcription of what was discovered during the final blessing ritual at the remnants of St. Elmo's, conducted by 3 exorcists, 2 monks, and 1 blind bishop. What they saw inside the mirror well, beneath the psychiatric wings foundation, was not a reflection. It was a waiting room, but not for the living, not for the dead. A holding space for copies. Hit that subscribe button and comment below what state you're listening from, because this isn't just the end of LaToya's case. This is where reality itself begins to split. Each exorcist reported seeing versions of themselves inside the mirror, but with subtle, horrifying differences. One saw himself blinking out of sync. Another had no mouth. The bishop, though blind, screamed in Latin until his heart stopped, claiming he saw with the eyes that do not belong to man. And in the center of the mirror room sat a chair, an ordinary rusted chair facing the wall, chained to the floor, empty, until one monk claimed he saw it move, and in the moment he did, the entire chamber darkened, though no leaking. Light source changed, just darkened, like something was watching from behind the glass. One of the final journal entries from the Red Veil files reads, "This isn't possession. This is replication. Mirrors are gateways not to hell, but to echo chambers, and some echoes gain shape." LaToya was never found. No body, no trace, no DNA, just a trail of reflections, a residue in glass, and the unsettling pattern that followed. Wherever the case was discussed, mirrors nearby began fogging from within, smiling faces appearing for split seconds, always too early, always too knowing. The last known sighting, a priest in Uruguay reported a young woman entering his church during a storm, barefoot, pale, hair dripping wet. She asked to confess. When he opened the booth, it was empty, except for a single message scratched into the wood. "Thank you for the face." They say evil hides in shadows, but now we know sometimes it hides in your reflection. And if one day, while brushing your teeth, your reflection smiles before you do, run, because LaToya learned one thing very well: how to leave the mirror.